Greetings, YouTube. The Doctor is in. Dr. Urius Papers here, coming at you with another commentary on Dungeons and Dragons. And today we are going to be looking at Crossbows and the Crossbow Expert feat. We're going to be looking at the Legacy version compared and contrasted to the 2024 version. We will also grade each one. I haven't really graded feats too much before. We did all the spells before. Now we're going to kind of go through all of the Legacy and at the same time the 2024 feats, grade all of them. Eventually I will get to all the spells. And then lastly, we're going to look at the actual crossbows themselves and how they have changed, how their different properties have changed compared and contrasted with Legacy and the 2024 version. But first, hey guys, don't forget to hit that like button and that subscribe button. Helps us out immensely, helps us put more material out, gives me motivation to go, give you guys these great videos, and then we can do more. All right, let's get into it. And right now, right here, I've got the Crossbow Expert feat from the Legacy version up. And the formatting between the Legacy version feats and the 2024 feats has changed a bit. The old Legacy feats were bulletized, so that's these bullet points here. The new feats, 2024, have all now, they're not bulletized anymore. They have gotten actual titles. So you can see ability score increase, ignore loading, firing, and immediately dually wielding. There's no titles on these. So let's go through the feat first. So first off, most of these crossbows in the Legacy version, so we'll look here at light crossbow, has the loading property, which means you can fire only one piece of ammunition from a loading weapon when you use an action, bonus action, or reaction, regardless of the number of attacks you normally make. So if you're a fighter and you have 3 attacks around and you do not have Crossbow Expert, you fire the crossbow, you can only fire once because of the loading property. However, if you have the Crossbow Expert, you ignore the loading property of crossbows with which you are proficient. So if you've got 3 attacks, you can actually take 3 attacks when you take that attack action, and you can fire it 3 times. Being within 5 feet, so the second bullet, being within 5 feet of a hostile creature does not impose disadvantage on your ranged attack rolls. That's a big one. So in the Legacy version, that was very generic and broad. It doesn't say ranged attack rolls with crossbow. It doesn't say crossbow ranged attacks. It doesn't say ranged spell attacks. It doesn't say ranged weapon attacks. It just says ranged attacks, which means if you had the Crossbow Expert feat as a Legacy, you did not get disadvantage if you were 5 feet within something on any ranged attack. That actually is going to get changed. And then the last bullet is when you use the attack action and attack with a one-handed weapon. So that's any one-handed weapon. That could be a dagger, a short sword, a long sword, any one-handed weapon. You can use a bonus action to attack with a hand crossbow you are holding. So it's got to be a hand crossbow, but I could attack with a long sword and then shoot you with the hand crossbow. And because of the second bullet, if I'm within 5 feet of you, I ignore disadvantage. And if I happen to have more than 1 attacks, I can fire that crossbow again because I ignore the loading property. Okay, so that was that one. What grade do we give this one? Well, I'm going to give this one, this was a very popular feat. I'm going to give it an A-. It was a very popular feat for a lot of classes to be able to use like dueling hand crossbows to get up in people's faces and use things. Very, very popular feat. So we'll give that one an A-. Now let's take a look at the 2024 version. So like I said, the formatting of these feats has changed quite a bit. First off, there's no prerequisites to this, and you could have taken this at first level if you had the ability to get a feat, like if you were a variant human who got a feat at first level. Now, this is a general feat, and almost all of these general feats, I haven't found one yet that doesn't have this. It has a prerequisite of being at least 4th level and a dexterity of 13 or better. So there are now prerequisites that go along with this. So that's one big difference. Another difference is instead of bullets, we've got titles. And one thing I have found with most of these general feats is they at least give an ability score increase to one ability. Almost all of them do this. So here we've got increase your dex by 1. That's really great. Before we didn't have that at all. So you get a free increase to your dex, and then we get ignore loading, which corresponds to this first bullet in the legacy version. It says you ignore the loading property of the hand crossbow, heavy crossbow, or light crossbow. Also, all called crossbows elsewhere in this feat. That's a very kind of legal term that you normally see in like contracts and things. I must have had some lawyers look at this, or one of the writers might have been a lawyer. If you're holding one of them, that is a crossbow, you can load a piece of ammunition into it even if you lack a free hand. So in the new player's handbook, and we know it's the new one because they've got this column for all the properties here. If we look at, say, light crossbow, it has the loading property. You can fire only one piece of ammunition from a loading weapon when you use an action, bonus action, or reaction, regardless of the number of attacks you make. So if you had 3 attacks, for instance, you could make 3 attacks with this. If you had a high-end crossbow, a heavy crossbow, or a light crossbow. Even if you lack a free hand. Now, that was not in here. That verbiage was not in here at all. Just said you ignored the loading property for things you're efficient. But this one even says if you lack a free hand, because heavy crossbows are two-handed. So if we look at that, a heavy crossbow, which is way down here, has the two-handed property, which means you had to have 2 hands. Okay, so I could make 3 attacks with a heavy crossbow with this. Firing into melee, again, that corresponds to this second bullet. Firing into melee, being within 5 feet of an enemy does not impose disadvantage on your attack rolls with crossbows. So now it goes from generic. So remember, the legacy version said disadvantage on your ranged attack rolls, whereas this one says disadvantage on your attack rolls with crossbows. So they got rid of that. They clarified it. So now this only works with crossbows, which makes sense. To me, personally, that made sense. The old feat allowed you to not be imposed disadvantage on any attack roll. Now it's just crossbows. And then finally, dual wielding, which corresponds to this last bullet, which has changed. So this got clarified. This basically just got reworded. Ignore loading got reworded. Dual wielding, when you make the extra attack of a light property, so the light property, so when you make an attack on your turn with a light weapon, you can make an extra attack as a bonus action later on. The extra attack must be made with a different light weapon, and you do not add your ability modifier to the extra attack's damage. So when you make the extra attack of the light property, and extra attacks of that instance came as like a different type of heading in the legacy rules. So it wasn't a property of a weapon. So when you make the extra attack of a light property, you can add your ability modifier to the damage of the extra attack if that attack is with a crossbow that has the light property, and you are not already adding that modifier to the damage. So if you're not already doing it because of this, then you get to add it. So essentially, a fighter, let's say it's a fighter that has 3 attacks, okay, that is a crossbow expert, and they have a light crossbow in each hand. They could make 3 attacks with one of those light crossbows. They could make an extra 3 attacks with one of those because they're ignoring the loading property, and then they could make a bonus action attack and add their actual damage to it. So it's different, and it's a different light weapon. There's 2 different ones there. So that is, I think that is a bump to this. This just allowed you to use, because before you couldn't use a hand crossbow unless you had the Crossbow Expert. Now it's basically just if it has the light property. Okay? All good stuff. All good stuff. What grade would we give this one? I'm still going to give this one, I'm going to give this one an A. I'm going to give this one an A. I think it's improved over the 2014 Legacy version, just because you get a bump to a score, and the dual wielding is better. I think it's quite a bit better. Now, let's look at the crossbows themselves. So here is the light crossbow, which did a D8 damage. It had the loading property. It had the ammunition property. It had a range of 80, 320, and it had the two-handed property. And did that change at all? So here is the light crossbow here. It's still a D8. Still has a range. Still has ammunition. Still has loading and two-handed. Didn't really change. However, it has the slow property. So it does require two hands. So you won't be wielding a light crossbow in the other hand. Or I'm sorry, a hand crossbow. But it does have the slow property. So if you hit a creature with this weapon and deal damage to it, so this is if you have the weapon masteries, you can reduce its speed by 10 feet until the start of your next turn. If the creature is hit more than once by weapons that have this property, the speed reduction doesn't exceed 10 feet. So if I'm a fighter with 3 attacks and I'm a crossbow expert, I can actually do this 3 times. And if I hit once, then I will slow it by 10 feet. Not 30 feet, not 20 feet, but 10 feet only. So that is pretty good. So that's a big difference between this. I think the biggest difference here is that there's a weapon mastery, so it makes it much more powerful. So then we've got martial. We've got martial crossbow. So we've got the hand crossbow, which does a D6 piercing. It has a range of 30 and 120. It's ammunition light and loading. And the new 2024 hand crossbow is a D6 piercing, ammunition light and loading, 30 to 120 same, but this one has Vex. Oh, didn't want to do that. This one has Vex. So, and Vex means if you hit a creature with this weapon and deal damage to the creature, you have advantage on your next attack roll against that creature before the end of your next turn. For the end of your next turn. So you got an entire round to get an advantage on an attack roll. So if you were to attack with this last and you hit, you, not somebody else, you have advantage on your next attack roll. So the next round, the first attack I got, I would have advantage. However, if this were, like if I had 2 hand crossbows and this were my first attack, then I would get advantage on the second one. So if I'm a rogue with 2 hand crossbows, which is really cool, and I hit with the first, let's say I hit with the first one, I would have advantage on the second one. And let's say I didn't have advantage on the first one, so I wouldn't, and there wasn't anybody around him, so I don't really get the imposition of anything that would trigger my sneak attack. However, the second one would trigger it because I have advantage now. So it allows you to get sneak attack a little bit better. Again, this one is better than this one here, the Legacy version, because of the weapon mastery. And lastly, we've got heavy crossbow. So crossbow heavy, 1d10 piercing. It's got ammunition heavy, which means you have disadvantage on attack rolls of weapons if it's a melee weapon and your strength score isn't at least 13. So you have to have a strength score of 13 or your dexterity isn't at least 13, okay? Loading and two-handed. For the heavy crossbow in 2014, and the range is 100 and 400, okay? Heavy crossbow, 1d10 piercing, ammunition, range 100 400. It's still heavy. So you have a disadvantage on attack rolls with a heavy weapon. And that if it's a melee weapon, it's your strength score. And if it's ranged, it's dex. So it's dex. It's got the loading property, which we ignore. It's two-handed, which doesn't allow us to wield a weapon in the other hand, but we can load it without that. And it has push. Now, this is one of my favorite ones. If you hit a creature with this weapon, you can push the creature up to 10 feet away from yourself if it is large or larger. I note something here about push. Let's click on that really quick. If you hit a creature with, I'm going to read this again. If you hit a creature with this weapon, you can push that creature up to 10 feet straight away from yourself if it is large or smaller. So I want to point something out with the slow ability. Slow means you can only reduce it by 10 feet. Push, however, does not say that you can only push it 10 feet away. It says if you hit with this weapon, you push them 10 feet. So what does that mean? That means if I have a fighter who has 3 attacks, who is a heavy and has a heavy crossbow, and they happen to be a crossbow expert, I can, and I hit 3 times, guess what? That thing's getting pushed 30 feet. So that's massive. Everybody here knows that I like forced movement, and this is a great forced movement. This, in my opinion, is an absolute A, especially with Crossbow Expert and a heavy crossbow to be able to push something. That's massive. That is absolutely awesome. So, all right, that is the video I have for everybody today. I appreciate everybody tuning in, and I will catch everybody later.